Hello, and welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemerovski, and I'm your host. Today, being the summer, it's that time of the year when the Aspen Institute is conducting the Ideas Fest, and we try and go and steal really smart people to come and appear on the show and talk about politics. For those of you that haven't seen the show before, we're here to talk about why the system is dysfunctional and polarized, but more importantly, in every show, we try and talk about how to fix that, how to take a system that's dysfunctional and polarized and make it better. Well, today I stole from the Aspen Institute Professor Muirhead from Dartmouth, and I'm going to read this because I couldn't remember it, but he's actually the Robert Clements Professor of Democracy and Politics. I love that title. And if he wasn't married, it'd probably be a great pickup line in a bar, you know. Either that or it would be the worst pickup line in the history of bars. I'm the Robert Clements
I don't think
Professor.
that's going to work.
So anyway,
I'll try it just for fun.
We're honored today to have Professor Muirhead here. And we're going to talk about a book he wrote called The Promise of Party in a Polarized Age. The Promise of Party in a Polarized Age. It's a terrific book. I just finished it over the weekend, and I think it's a terrific book, among other things, because we're going to talk about it later. He actually agrees with me that maybe having a third party to fix some of these problems is the way to go. So in preparing for today's interview, I watched an interview with Professor Muirhead on another show, and he was introduced as a political philosopher. So above everything else I just said, that was the best part of all for me. I've never had a political philosopher on the show before. So today we're going to welcome Professor Muirhead, political philosopher. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So did you invent that title, or it was, I think, the Uncommon Ground show, or whatever the show's on?
Yeah, isn't that great? You're right. Now that is a great title. I'm with you. I don't think that's going to help in a bar either, but no, it actually goes back to Socrates. He was the first political philosopher.
Oh, he is? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, Plato is a political philosopher, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, and on down through Rousseau and Marx. And they're political philosophers because they're trying to get at the truth about politics. And
like an oxymoron to get about the truth about politics?
Kind of, because most of, you know, opinion is everything in politics. Opinion is the fuel that you know, makes the political fire burn. And the idea that you could get underneath or around or cross opinion to some truth, that's a pretty radical idea. But that's the idea underlying political philosophy. So part of what you do if you're a political philosopher is you teach the history of political philosophy, starting with Plato and Socrates and moving all the way down. And the other part of what you do is you get into arguments that people are getting into today about what justice means. For instance, there's a basic question that Americans are debating right now. Should the government be responsible for helping citizens get access to health care? Or should the government just keep, you know, the government doesn't help us get access to hotel rooms. It doesn't help us get access to, you know, luxury vehicles. Why should it help us get access to expensive health care? And some argue that it's a matter of justice. You know, all citizens, if they have medical need, should get care, even if they're poor, even if they're not connected, even if no one knows them, even if they're old. Others say, no, you should find your own way to medical care and rely on yourself for that, and the government shouldn't help out. That's a disagreement about justice. And when you and I get into that disagreement, or anybody, you're engaging in political philosophy. So you don't have to be a professor to be a political philosopher.
Well, I aspire to that. Maybe one day I'll be on a TV show and they can call me that, and I'll say, finally, I graduated.
Yeah, that might be what you are.
I made the big time.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I have this whole interview prepared, but I'm going to now start totally differently because of what you just said. I disagree with you in this respect. I don't think we're having the debate you just described. And to me, the question is, why aren't we having that debate? Why are we having a debate between who's killing who the fastest, who's denying service to who the fastest or in the most brutal way, shape, or form, and who's doing everything horrible to the humanity? Why is our political system not allowing us to have that philosophical discussion that you said we should be having right now?
Yeah, and well, look, I'm completely with you in feeling a frustration that we're not getting at the really interesting, deep questions that motivate a disagreement, say about, you know, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Instead, there's just a lot of you know, name calling and highly charged sort of calculated rhetoric being thrown around. And I was really disappointed at the time the Democrats passed the Affordable Care Act, because I thought even then, in their moment of victory, Obama, Pelosi, Reid in the Senate, they didn't really get it, the real philosophy underlying that policy. They talked about how the Affordable Care Act would solve certain technical problems. There was something called a donut hole, which is a little gap in, I think, Medicare coverage. It solved that. It would take care of people with pre-existing conditions, a discrete group that now has a benefit. It would take care of families with children, between 20 and 25. Another discrete group gets a benefit. But they weren't talking the language of the common good. They weren't saying, this is the kind of country we think we want to become. A country where if someone is sick, they get health care just because they're sick, regardless of wealth. That's the commitment that we Democrats think citizens owe each other. That's the deep principle. That's the deep view of the country. Obama didn't speak to it. Other Democrats really didn't speak to it. The only one who did was Ted Kennedy, and he was really in his final hours, and he didn't have the energy to really inflect the vocabulary as powerfully as he might otherwise have. So yeah, from the beginning, we've let the big questions shift to the side. And I think the Republicans have an interesting argument. They think, rock bottom, they think the government just should not be involved in guaranteeing access to health care. And they're afraid to say that. So we have, each side is afraid to utter the big principle that motivates them.
Well, and even now, the Democrats passed Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, and now the Republicans have been dedicated to tearing it down and getting rid of it. And I'm trying to follow this in the press, okay? Now, last week or the last 10 days, between snippets on TV and what I saw in the press, I can't tell you how much volume was dedicated to the fact that in the Senate they're working in secret to do something, okay? That was the noise. Now the Senate bill has come out. I defy anybody to go to any of those papers or places that only one of the rhetoric would be about, is this being done in secret or not, and find a place where you can actually understand what just did happen in the Senate, so you can maybe participate in this debate if you wanted to. So it just seems to me the system is so dysfunctional. Not only don't we have debate, you can't even go anywhere anymore to find out the facts you need to drive a debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Republicans are trying to do something that's almost never been done, which is to take a broad-based benefit and eradicate it. The politics of retrenchment is it's almost impossible to wind back benefits. Adding new benefits, that we know how to do. To add something to Medicare, to add prescription drug coverage. I mean, even Republicans know how to do that. I think George W. Bush was the one who did that. But eradicating benefits is very hard politics. And that's what the Republican Party...
Even if you had a functional system.
Yeah. I mean, here's something, you're used to it, you have it, we're going to take it away. It's hard for democratically elected representatives to do that. And that's what that is, oddly enough, the #1 priority of the Republican Party today. They've been campaigning on eradicating Obamacare since it was passed. And so they have set for themselves a very, very difficult task. That's why they had to do it in secret. They can't let it be known. They don't want it known that 20 million people are going to be thrown off the insurance rolls. They don't want it to be known that the poorest Americans are going to be worse off. Self-employed Americans are going to be worse off. And the wealthiest Americans whose households make more than $450,000 a year are going to get a tax cut because they're eradicating the tax that went along with Obamacare. Only wealthy people pay it. It's a capital gains surcharge. You have to make a lot of money to pay it. They don't want anyone to know that. That's why they're acting in secret. Now, why it's hard for you to get at the details of the policy now that it's been published, that's kind of a failure of the media. I think the media will catch up with the bill. And in a week or 2 or 3, you'll be able to get at those details. I think the Republicans want to get this thing passed before the media has a chance to really digest it and explain it.
But in the meantime, we get government by soundbite, so that makes me crazy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and I don't think it's as effective as people assume it is. I actually think that each side would probably be better off if they explain things a little bit more fully and with a little bit more confidence in the capacity of people to understand a long explanation, something that takes more than 30 seconds. 2 minutes, say.
So I don't always read book covers, but before I read your book, I happened to open a book cover, and there it says, right, the first thing, and you may not have written this, but your editor or someone did, says, at the root of America's broken politics is hyperbolic partisanship. That's right there.
Wow, wow. So, can I look at that?
Absolutely. So
at the root of Americans broken.
On our show, which we try to understand how the system get dysfunctional and polarized and everything, and you attribute a lot of what's wrong with our political system today, this hyperbolic partisanship. So tell us how you came to think that way, and then we'll kind of tease our way through some of your theories.
Well, so and the nuance there is I'm pro-partisan. I actually like parties, and I like partisan debate. I actually think that a
you go to parties and say, I'm the Robert Clemens professor.
Right. I go to parties.
That's right.
I'm a party guy. And I think it's probably good for the country to have conservatives and liberals and maybe others too, but who are really debating or disagreeing about fundamental questions. I think that's healthy, and I'll tell you why. We have choices to make in this country that we, the people, just don't want to make. Since Reagan was elected in 1980, the American people have voted for tax cuts every time they've had a chance. And the American people have voted for entitlement expansion every time they've had a chance. And we've been doing both. And the combination of those two things is a structural deficit. There are economists who will say we don't have to worry about the deficit. It's not as high a fraction of GDP as it might be. We can, always tax our way out of it or cut spending if we need to. We're in better shape than Japan or something like that. Nonetheless, in a time of economic expansion and low unemployment, we have a whopping $600 billion deficit. And when times get bad, that deficit becomes quickly a $2 trillion deficit, as we saw in 2010. So,
or a cumulative $20 trillion deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I would say we have a basic choice to make. We can pay for the government we want, which is going to mean more taxes, or we can cut government and get the taxes we want, which are relatively low. One way or the other, each is an honest path. And more I see, Democrats standing up for a government that does a lot and that taxes to fund it. Obama was very consistent. He added this benefit, Obamacare, and he added a tax to pay for it. More and more conservatives are consistent. They say, you know what, we got to cut government, cut Obamacare, because we want to cut taxes. You don't have to agree with that, but it's a consistent and respectable position. And there is, I think, a real choice to make that Americans just don't want to make. They want low taxes and large government or a good entitlement state, and that's incoherent. So there's something good about partisanship. The hyper-partisanship that's killing the system is the partisanship that's motivated more by detestation of the other side than it is by disagreement with the other side's conception of the country. So remember, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, Obama, in his second term, wanted to pass immigration reform. I wish he had, because if he had, we wouldn't have had the demagoguery about immigration and by Trump in the last campaign. What was stopping him? Well, the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate. They also wanted immigration reform, or so they said. I'll bet they wish they did too, because they might have had Rubio instead of Trump as their nominee. But they wouldn't. They said, well, we're waiting to hear from President Obama. What's his plan? And President Obama said, I'm not going to put out a plan, because as soon as I put out a plan, you are going to oppose it just because it's my plan. I could put out the same plan that you guys come up with. And if my name's on it, you'll oppose it. Because you don't care what's in the plan. You just want to defeat me. And Mitch McConnell said, when Obama was first elected, or he said, I think maybe in 2010, when the Republicans got control of the legislature, he said, the first goal of the Republican Party is defeating Barack Obama. And when the only goal of a party is to kill off the other side, when it's no longer about policy, when it's no longer about philosophy and conception of the common good, then you have a kind of hyper-toxic partisanship that prevents compromise, prevents working together. In the long run, it'll make it hard for us to belong to the same country. So that's what I'm talking about.
And of course, that's the exact same position the Democrats have taken. It's just that they learned from Mitch McConnell, so they don't have a leader who's spoken that. It's just that the second President Trump was elected, they have all dedicated themselves to
whatever
him.
he's for, we're against.
Right, they've dedicated, exactly. That's
although they haven't really been, I mean, we don't know if that's true. I think Democrats would vote for an infrastructure bill. I think if Trump were serious about that, he could probably pass it with a minority of Republican votes and a majority of Democratic votes. If you could get Speaker Ryan to bring it to the floor, I think Democrats would probably pass that. When you look back to the early years of the George W. Bush administration, Democrats backed Bush on education. They backed Bush on No Child Left Behind.
Was one of the last times we had a bipartisan piece of major legislation.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think you're right. They're feeling pretty obstreperous right now.
Yeah.
But
and I've become I'm with you in the fact that we need parties, but I've become anti-party in the sense that I think the two parties are so broken that, as you said, they can't communicate. They're in these silos that people talk about all the time. So when I was brought up, and I started most of my political life in the 90s, someone who was a mentor of mine said, here's what you do. You fight around the election time, but right after the election, you get together and govern. We don't govern anymore.
Right.
And now that, we just have continuous campaigns,
right.
and we just continuously fight.
Yeah, you're so right, Steve. I mean, the season of campaigning has to give way to the work of governing.
But it doesn't.
And now it's campaigning.
How did we get there? How did that part happen?
Yeah, it may have happened, and this may be a gift of the 1990s.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, it's the gift you can't give away. Clinton adopted a kind of almost permanent campaign mentality in the White House, but he also faced a much more vigorous and full-throated opposition from the legislature, led by Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich had no time for formalities or niceties, the sort of custom of bipartisanship. He went after Clinton with everything he had, and he won. For the first time in 55 years, the Republicans under Newt Gingrich got control of the House of Representatives. Right. So I think from that moment, from 1994 on, we've seen the two sides almost stay in campaigning mode. And it just gets ratcheted up a little bit with each new president, with each new cycle.
Right, and when you're constantly in campaign mode, there is no time left for governing.
Right. So
in your book, you write about what you call high partisanship and low partisanship.
Yeah.
Tell us about those dynamics.
Yeah, so that's, I like when I think of high partisanship, it's the partisanship.
That's what we have in Colorado. We have marijuana and we have high partisanship.
Yeah, and it probably does it go okay? I bet it's fun.
We seem to get problem solved.
Yeah, so that's right. And the idea is by high partisanship, I mean kind of lofty or noble or principled partisanship, when you think that what's motivating the difference is a disagreement about principle. There's this idea in the Democratic Party that what politics is about is sharing risk, that citizens should stand together and together carry the risk that one of them might suffer something bad, like a disease. And so we all chip in and pay for caring for that disease. When one person suffers it, one person gets in a car accident, we all pay the costs in a way of treating that victim in the accident. The Republican Party has a view that individuals should benefit from the risks that they decide to take, and should also bear the bad consequences of risks that they assume that don't work out, and that we shouldn't socialize risk, because when we do socialize risk, we allow people to be irresponsible, and we take from people any incentive to take a risk, to do something big and daring and risky. Those are just different philosophies, and they each have a kind of truth to them. And depending on the moment, depending on the policy, one or the other might be persuasive. That's the big, lofty, noble, or high partisanship that I don't think we want to be without. I think we want that in our politics. Low partisanship is just about winning the next election, doing whatever it takes to win the next election. And it's all about strategy, and it ends up in just enmity and just hating the other side. Now look, the two things are connected. You don't make your conception of the common good powerful unless you win elections. So if the Democrats want to bring back Obamacare, they're going to have to win an election. They're going to have to think like low partisans. Who do we run? What should they say? What shouldn't they say? What kind of party should we be? What do we say about the other side? What's going to work? So you're never going to be without it. But what you really want is a balance where high partisanship, the philosophy that makes sense of your party, is what's driving the thing. And when you get rid of that, and all you have left is the low partisanship, then you have this sort of toxic form of hatred that's not about doing things. It's not about activating a philosophy. It's not even about imagining your country as you think it might ideally look. It's just about hating the other side and beating the other side. That's all it's about. And that's what happens when low partisanship takes over.
In fact, one of the scary sentences in your book, you say, in all likelihood, normal politics is not coming back. And you say intense partisanship is the new normal. So that's kind of scary to me. If intense partisanship is the new normal, how do we escape that? How do you get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think and this is sort of dissatisfying because it's hard to imagine this coming to pass. I think we have to learn how to disagree with each other. We're not going to get to a place where we just stop disagreeing, where somehow the party disagreement goes away and we all just stand together and we vote for the same people who want to do the same things. That's not going to happen. We really, I think, the conservative party is stronger today than it's ever been. Liberals are stronger today than they've been since the 1930s. So we have a very vigorous partisanship, and it's not going away. What we have to learn how to do is really disagree with each other, respectfully and constructively. And this is my job. I mean, I work in a university, and I teach students, and I teach them about politics. And it's my job, and the job of people like me, to teach students how to disagree with each other, how to have an argument, how to be disagreed with, and not hate the other side, and not just disparage the other side. And I think our universities are failing in this right now. I think what's happening in our universities is there's a powerful desire to get rid of disagreement there too. So
yeah, we don't have time for the university thing today, but that's
but if you want to know
problem.
the solution is that. It's education. People have to learn how to disagree. It doesn't just happen in colleges. It's not even happening in colleges the way it should. It can happen. It's more likely to happen at the bar or at a party or on the street or even in the media when people encounter each other on political shows. And too often we just have conservative shows where everybody agrees with each other and liberal shows where everybody agrees with each other. And we don't see debate. Right. We don't see it modeled. We don't see it happen. And we're forgetting how to engage in it.
And again, it's part of that silo thing going on. So here's a concern I have. I've been thinking about writing this. I'll just give you the idea. You write about it.
Okay.
Because you're a political philosopher.
Yeah, right.
You're teaching students now. They're 18, 19, 20, 21. Maybe you have a grad student here and there, whatever. My oldest daughter's 30 right now. As far as I can tell, her generation, I think she's an early millennial. They have never seen government work. They've only lived in a dysfunctional time to a certain extent. How do you take generations now of people who have only observed government failing? How do you reverse that? They don't even have a model to draw from. And how do you teach that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things we can learn, I think, about government, or what it's succeeded at and failed at in the last 50, 60 years. It's not the kind of thing people ask, and it's not the kind of thing that's often taught. But you're right. The last 15 years have been pretty dismal. And I think that's why you get these people coming from outside the parties, like Trump or Bernie Sanders, taking them over almost in Bernie's case. Because let's look back at the last 15 years. What you see are the leaders of each party failing in a very, very devastating way. Conservatives said in 2003 we needed to invade Iraq in order to make the Middle East safe for democracy. Don't worry, they said 6 days, 6 weeks. It's not going to take 6 months. This is going to be easy. We'll be greeted as liberators. By 2006, it was a civil war that no one could deny, and I think everyone now views it as a calamity. In fact, the Republican nominee and the sitting president, Donald Trump, ran saying it was a failure. So massive failure, possibly $5 trillion failure. Imagine what that would do for infrastructure in the United States if we hadn't poured it into the sands of Iraq. Liberal elites told us in the 1990s, let's deregulate. Deregulate finance, deregulate the banks. The economy will grow, it'll be more efficient, it'll be more productive. Well, we didn't get sustained 3% growth or 2% growth. What we got was a financial sector meltdown that nearly took the global economy down with it in 2008. And what we had to do, we were told by our government, in order to meet that threat, was bail out the very bankers who had caused the meltdown. One of the most distasteful things, I've seen in my adult life from politics. So massive failure from right-wing elites and left-wing elites, two big failures. And I think that has depleted trust and confidence in traditional elites represented by people like Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. Those were the presumptive nominees, and one of them was going to be president. And neither one is president because I think of those failures by those parties. But if we look back before that, at what the government's done over the last 50, 60 years, there are some serious successes that, I'd like your daughter's generation to be aware of. Old people aren't impoverished. It was a massive problem.
Right.
And people get too old to continue working. Some people could move in with their children. Many people couldn't. Poverty among the elderly population was an intractable problem. Solved. Old people aren't eating dog food anymore because of Social Security. And that's the government. Our rivers, as you know, were so polluted they were lighting up on fire in 1970. When I was a kid, the idea that you'd swim in the river that went through my town, Manchester, New Hampshire, was unthinkable because you'd come out of that water with a disease. You'd be in the hospital. It was so full of fecal matter and whatever else. It's now perfectly clean. The Clean Water Act cleaned up rivers all over this country. We were worried about the eradication of wilderness. Very prudent worry. 1964, Wilderness Act, Wilderness Preservation Act. And now there are wilderness areas around, especially this area, the West, and they're very special. They're not just national parks or national forests. I don't know a lot about it, but on the sort of back of the envelope sensibility, I'd say looks like a success. We have wilderness because we preserved it. So we shouldn't be one-sided in assessing the success and failure of government. There's some real failures, and that's all you can really see looking back in the last since 2000. But there are some stunning successes too.
Well, and again, you addressed that in your book, and the book we're talking about is, I'm going to have to read the cover in front of me, The Promise of Party in a Polarized Age. We've been talking with Professor Muirhead from Dartmouth College. And what I'm going to do now is tell you, you're going to have to read the book because when he gave his last answer, if you read the book, you'll understand how he gets there. Because what Professor Muirhead does is he walks us through really the transition from a time when government worked and maybe the golden period of politics in the United States from the 30s to the 60s-ish. And that explains really how the system starts breaking down with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and really how the parties get rejiggered at that time, and the Democrats switch from the South to the North, et cetera. So I want you to read this book. As always, I've had fun, and Professor, thanks for being here today.
Right on. Thank you.
And we hope that you've all had fun in watching the show. If you want to catch all our shows, you can go to grassrootstv.org, and we also have individualized interviews from our shows at our YouTube site, which is noneoftheabove.tv, noneoftheabove.tv. Remember, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.